Howdy, folks, and welcome to another day in the Milky Way. And tonight, my gosh, I got another great show for you. Thank you all for coming. I know it's a little fast here and there, but in these days that speed by, as fast as it can be, I can't believe that it's coming summer any day now. The days are getting longer, and we're starting to plant our gardens and enjoy our summer warm days. You'll be out there grilling food on the grill and all that good stuff. Thank you all for coming. Thank you everybody in the chat room and everybody who's joining me tonight. It's a real pleasure to bring you things that are from history. I like history, and the history, it may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So pay attention. We got good things coming up. So to start off, I have some really old history books. And tonight I'm going to be reading out of this book. If you can see it. There we go. It is The Beginner's American History, because we're beginners in American history. And this book, if you don't believe me, is from 1894. If you don't believe me, there you go. This is published in 1894. It's got the old pictures in. There's the Statue of Liberty, enlightening the world. The Beginner's American History. So, what are we going to read tonight? We're going to find out about one of our most influential, outdoorsy kind of guys who did things with the Indians. He was a tracker, a guide, a traveler. He was a politician. He was everything under the sun. I'll tell you, this guy, if he didn't do it all, I don't know who could have stood in his shoes. And his name is Daniel Boone. And now y'all probably watched the TV show and with Fess Parker, and I think that was Fess Parker. But if I'm wrong, let me know. I'm sure you all watched all those. There was Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone, and you watched him running around with his coonskin hat or something. Well, did Daniel Boone wear a coonskin hat? Do you really know? Well, he lived in Pennsylvania area. To tell you the truth, he started out in that area. Of course, most of these people that came back in the day, they started out on the coast and looked to the wild frontier, going to the west, because it was wild back in them days. Indians and the first settlers taming out wild country. And from there, they moved down from Pennsylvania into Kentucky and then Missouri, along the Mississippi River, which was one of the big highways of yesteryear. We can call it yesteryear because it was a long time ago. Now, this book being from 1894, which is over 100 years old, I got to be really careful with it because it's very brittle. You got to figure they must have known something because they were a little bit closer to history back then. And old Daniel Boone was carving out that history as fast as his knife could carve out a piece of wood and whittle away. So what are we going to learn tonight about Daniel Boone? Who was this guy? Who was Daniel Boone? And I'm going to share some stuff with you tonight that is just going to be off the charts. Okay. This is what we got. Here is Daniel Boone making it across. He is the man. Okay, so he's all decked out with his horse. They did have horses, and a pack horse, of course. He's got all the materials that he needs. He's got his bedroll. He's got food. He's got his gun packed on his side. There you go. That is our Daniel Boone. And mountains in the background. Great drawing or rendering. Remember, there was no pictures back then. Let's see. I got, there you go. Here he is, leading people through. I got a lot of pictures. Daniel Boone. What else do we know? What do you see about him? There you go. Here's Daniel Boone and in those moccasins and deer skins. in the old time Western. Remember, this was in the early days. Okay, so what do we know about Daniel Boone? Okay, we got this all blowed up, and we are going to go to Daniel Boone. What does it say from 1894 in our beginner's history? It says Daniel Boone. He was the hunter of the West. Did Boone's life in North Carolina before Washington began to fight the battles of the Revolution. To the east, or in the east, Daniel Boone and other famous hunters were fighting bears, Indians in what is called the West. But by the war in the woods, these braves and hardy men helped us to get possession of that part of the country. Daniel Boone was born in Pennsylvania. His father moved to North Carolina, and Daniel helped him cut down the trees round their log cabin in the forest. He plowed the land, which was thick with stumps, hoed the corn that grew up among those stumps, and then, as there was no mill near, he pounded it into meal for Johnny cake. And Johnny cake must be some kind of a bread or something. So if you know what Johnny cake is, let me know, because I have not looked it up. I'm a dumbass. I don't know what Johnny cake is, but it must be made with corn, and it must be good to eat. He learned how to handle a gun quite as soon as he did a hoe. The unfortunate deer or a coon that saw young Boone's coming toward them knew that he had seen his best days and that he would soon have the whole Boone family sitting around him at the dinner table. Boone's wanderings in the western forest, his bear tree. When Daniel had grown to manhood, he wandered off with his gun on his shoulder and, crossing the mountains, entered what is now the state of Tennessee. That whole country was then wilderness, full of savage beasts and still more savage Indians. And Boone had many a sharp fight with both. More than 130 years ago, he cut these words on a beech tree, still standing in eastern Tennessee. D. Boone killed a bar on this tree in 1760. You see, if you see, you would examine the tree on which the words can still be read, that Boone could not spell very well, but he could do what the bear mind a good deal more. He could shoot to kill. Boone goes to, in Kentucky, what kind of game he found there. The Indians, the dark and bloody ground. 9 years after he cut his name on the tree, Boone and his companions went to a new part of the country. The Indians called it Kentucky. There he saw buffalo, deer, bear, wolves, enough to satisfy the best hunters in America. The region was kind of no man's land, because through many tribes of Indians roamed over it, none of them pretended to own it. These band of Indians were always fighting and trying to drive each other out, so Kentucky was often called the dark and bloody ground. But as the savages hated each other, they hated the white man, or the pale faces, as they called them, still even more. Indian tricks, the owls. The hunters were on the lookout for these Indians, but the savages practiced all kinds of tricks to get the hunters near enough to shoot them. Sometimes Boone would hear a gobble of a wild turkey. He would listen a moment, and then he would say, "That's not a wild turkey, but an Indian imitating that bird." But he wouldn't fool me and get me to come near enough to put a bullet through my head. One evening, an old hunter on his way to his cabin heard what seemed to be two young owls calling to each other. But his quick ear noticed that there was something not quite natural in their calls. And what was stranger still, that the owls seemed to be on the ground instead of being perched in trees, as well-behaved owls would be. He crept cautiously along the bushes till he saw something ahead which looked like a stump. He didn't altogether like the looks of that stump. He aimed his rifle at it and fired. The stump, or what seemed to be one, fell over backward with a groan. He had killed an Indian who had been waiting to kill him. Okay, Boone makes the Wilderness Road and builds a fort to Boonesboro. Okay, see, this is where he's mapping out that road, everyone. Okay, and there he is, older man going hunting. You haven't seen that? There you go. It's a rendering drawing of Boone. There it is, in an older man, more distinguished. Okay, see if I got a, nope. We got, yep, there's him on the road to Boonesboro. Okay, let's check this out. There's his hunting cabins. And here we go. These are some of the places he's been. The roads and mountains that he had: a Green Mountain, Callaway Peak, Hemlock Ridge. If you live in these areas and you know all about him, let me know. I would love to hear what you got to say. Okay, so Boone makes the Wilderness Road and builds the fort at Boonesboro. In 1775, Boone, with a party of 30 men, chopped a path through the forest from the mountains of eastern Tennessee to the Kentucky River, a distance of about 200 miles. This was the first path in this part of the country leading to the Great West. It was called the Wilderness Road. Over the road, with which thousands of immigrants traveled afterwards. Boone took his family with other settlers to Kentucky River. There they built a fort called Boonesboro. That fort was a great protection to all the first settlers in Kentucky. In fact, it was hard to see how the state could not have grown up without it. So in some way, we can say with truth that Daniel Boone, the hunter, fighter, and road maker, was a state builder besides. Boone's daughter is stolen by the Indians. How he found her. One day, Boone's daughter was out with two other girls in the canoe on the river. Suddenly, some Indians pounced on them and carried them off. One of the girls, as she went along, broke off twigs from the bushes so that her friend might be able to follow her tracks through the woods. And the Indian caught her doing it and told her that he would kill her if she did not. Instantly, stop. Then she slid over a small bit of her dress and dropped a piece from time to time. Boone and his men followed the Indians like bloodhounds. They picked up bits of the dress and so easily found which way the savages is gone. They came with the Indians just as they were sitting down round a fire to eat supper, creeping toward them behind the trees as softly as a cat creeps up behind a mouse. Boone and his men aimed their rifles and fired. Two of the Indians fell dead, and the rest ran for their lives, and the girls were carried back in safety to the fort. Boone is captured by the Indians. Sorry about the dogs barking, people. Okay, so there he is. He's making his way, and he's even got his own forest, believe it or not. There you go. Making his way down. Boone is captured by the Indians. They adopt him as a son. Later, Boone himself was caught. Sorry, everybody. Sorry. Okay. Boone is captured by the Indians. They adopt him as a son. Later, Boone himself was caught and carried off by the Indians. They respected his courage so much that they would not kill him, but decided to adopt him. That is, take him to the tribe as one of their own people to make an Indian of him. They pulled out all his hair except one long lock called the scalp lock, which they left to grow in Indian fashion. The squaws and the girls braided bright feathers in this lock so that Boone looked quite gay. That means happy, not gay. Just happy people. Don't get that in your mind. Then the Indians took him down to the river. There they stripped him and scrubbed him with all their might to get his white blood out, as they said. Next, they painted his face with stripes with red and yellow clay so that he looked, as they thought, handsomer than he'd ever before in his life. Oh, when all this is done, they were satisfied and appeared of their new Indian, and they sat down with a great feast and made merry. So this is Daniel Boone. He's all clean and spiffied up. He's all bald with one strand. He looks like an Indian, only a white man in disguise. Boone escapes, but the Indians find him again. What a handful of tobacco dust did. Okay. After a time, Boone managed to escape, but the Indians were so fond of him that they could not rest till they found him again. One day, he was at work in kind of a shed drying some tobacco leaves. He heard a slight noise and turning round saw 4 Indians with their guns pointed at him. Now Boone said, we got you. You no get away this time. How are you? said Boone pleasantly. Glad to see you. Just wait a minute till I get you some of my tobacco. He gathered 2 large handfuls of the leaves. They were as dry as powder, and crumpled them into dust in his hands. Coming forward as if to give the welcome presents to the Indians, he suddenly sprang on them and filled their eyes, mouth, and nose with the stinging tobacco dust. The savages were half choking and nearly blinded. While they were dancing around, coughing and sneezing and rubbing their eyes, Boone slipped out of the shed and got to a place of safety. The Indians were mad as they could be, yet they could hardly help laughing at Boone's trick. For cunning as the red men were, he was more cunning still. But Daniel Boone, he was smart, wasn't he? And so goes the smartness. And let's see what else Boone's got going on. Yeah. And that goes to that page. But anyway, maybe we got a picture for that. There's an old picture. There we go. He's getting old now. Boones Old Age. What a fitting picture for that. Boones Old Age. He moved to Missouri. He begs for a piece of land, his grave. Boone lived to be a very old man. He had owned a good deal of land in the West, but he had lost possession of it. See, even Daniel Boone makes bad choices. When Kentucky began to fill up with people and the game was killed off, Boone moved across the Mississippi into Missouri. He said that he went because he wanted more elbow room and with a chance to hunt buffalo again. Remember, after 1804, there were no more buffalo on the eastern side of the Mississippi. He now begged the state of Kentucky to give him a small piece of land where, as he said, he could lay his bones. The people of the state generously helped him to get nearly 1,000 acres. Yeah, a small piece of land, 1,000 acres. But he appeared to have soon lost possession of it. If he actually did lose it, then this brave old hunter who had opened up the way for such a multitude of immigrants to get their farms at the West died without owning a piece of ground big enough for a grave. He is buried in Frankfort, Kentucky, within sight of the river on which he built his fort at Boonesboro. Summary. Daniel Boone, a famous hunter from North Carolina, opened up the road through the forests and the rivers and mountains of eastern Tennessee to Kentucky River. It was called the Wilderness Road, and over thousands of immigrants went into Kentucky to settle. Boone and others built the fort at Boonesboro, Kentucky, and went there to live. That fort protected the settlers against the Indians, and so helped that part of the country to grow until it became the state of Kentucky. Well, and there you go. And what does it say here? In 1820, Chester Harding painted the only known portrait of Daniel Boone while the frontiersman still lived. At the time, Boone was so weak that he had to be propped up while hardly working. Soon thereafter, James Autolus engraved. So, he was old at that time. I think he lived to be about 80, but I'm not sure about that. So, what do we got here? Let's move on. So that's the only known portrait painted of him. You got to remember, this is in the early 1800s. And there's his house in Missouri. He had a nice house and nice homestead. As you can see, all made of stone, simple fashioned for back in the day. They named a park after him, National Forest, Red River Gorge, Geological Area, Daniel Boone National Forest. So if you're out west or out east and you come across Missouri, Kentucky area, check out the Daniel Boone National Forest. And there we go. And there's the guy. And let's check this out. Things you might not know about Daniel Boone. His family came to America to escape religious persecution. In 1713, Daniel Boone's father, a weaver and a blacksmith, journeyed from his hometown in Brighteon, England, to the colony of Pennsylvania, established by William Penn in 1781 as a haven for religious tolerance. Like Penn, Squire Boone belonged to the Society of Friends, or Quakers, a group whose members faced persecution in England for their beliefs in 1720. So I guess he was a Quaker. In 1720, Squire married fellow Quaker Sarah Morgan, and Daniel, the sixth of the couple's 11 children, was born in 1734 in present-day Berks County, Pennsylvania. In the 1740s, two of the oldest Boone children wed Whirlings, or non-Quakers, and were disowned by the local Quaker community. After Squire Boone refused to publicly apologize for the second of these two marriages, he too was kicked out of the Quakers. Well, I guess he wasn't a Quaker anymore. He subsequently left Pennsylvania with his family in 1750 and traveled by wagon to the colony of North Carolina, where in 1753 he purchased 2 tracts of land near present-day Mocksville. Okay. Boone blazed a trail to Transylvania. He got that typo, Pennsylvania. In 1775, Boone and a group of some 30 woodmen left to complete a 200-mile trail through the wilderness. Now remember, this is modern-day writing, and we just read from a book from 1894. In 1775, Boone and a group of 30 woodsmen left to complete a 200-mile trail through the woods. Now remember, these were trees that hadn't been ever cut. So when you're cutting a tree and you didn't have a chainsaw, you're working your butt off. Trust me, it's not any fun. Axes and hand saws, man, those were hard days, and they didn't get paid a whole lot. Okay, Boone had been hired for the job by Richard Henderson, a North Carolinian who, along with a group of investors, planned to establish a colony called Transylvania in an area comprising much of the present-day Kentucky and part of the present-day Tennessee. After Boone blazed the trail, which became known as the Wilderness Road, he helped establish one of Kentucky's earliest settlements, Boonesboro, which became Transylvania's capital. The Transylvanian colony was short-lived. In 1778, the Virginia General Assembly voided the deal Henderson had struck with the Cherokees for the land. The Cherokees were the Indians. Nevertheless, the Wilderness Road became the gateway by which an estimated 200,000 settlers journeyed to the western frontier. By the early 19th century, among those immigrants was Abraham Lincoln's grandfather, who in 1779 traveled the Wilderness Road from Virginia to Kentucky, where America's 16th president was born in 1809. Boone blazed I read that one, sorry. He was an international celebrity during his lifetime. Boone was transformed from a local hero into someone who internationally famous when his story was included in a book, The Discovery, Settlement, and Present State of Kentucky, published in 1784. This book was written by John Filmson, a Pennsylvania schoolteacher who turned Kentucky land speculator, and in an effort to lure settlers to Kentucky, the author, who interviewed Boone, presented the frontiersman adventures in what we supposedly, in his own words, although the embellished language belonged to Filson. So in other words, he became a cartoon hero. The book proved popular in both America and Europe, where the readers were captivated by Boone's stories. After Boone's death in 1820, his legend continued to grow with the publication of such best-selling works as the biographical memoir of Daniel Boone, the first settler of Kentucky. Released in 1833, this is a sensational account of Boone's life. Author Timothy Flint portrayed him as a ferocious Indian slayer who engaged in hand-to-hand combat and swung on vines to elude capture. In reality, Boone and his friendly relationships with a number of Native Americans and claimed to have killed just a few of them. So, yes, the tall tales grow. Boone was unlucky when it came to real estate. Although Boone helped open up Kentucky to thousands of settlers, he ultimately was unsuccessful when it came to securing his own piece of property. During 1780 and 1790s, he worked as a surveyor in Kentucky while also investing in real estate. However, his efforts as a land speculator failed and to make him rich, and Boone ended up getting swindled in some deals, and in other cases failed to properly register his land claims. He got hit with lawsuits for selling property to which he did not have a valid title, and also got sued for producing faulty surveys. Well, I guess, even though the land was big and free, you still had to put a claim on it and have it properly documented. And even back in those days, you just didn't go and get land for nothing. And there you go. Even Daniel Boone couldn't succeed on that. And then he got swindled. And of course, even back in those days, there were swindlers. Boone even received death threats after his testimony in various court cases resulted in people losing their land claims. Boone tried to get, but largely failed at other business ventures as well. He owned a store and a tavern in Limestone, present-day Maysville. Served as a supplier of ginseng root, the market eventually collapsed, leaving him in debt, and bought horses with the intention of reselling them. Before it could happen, a number of the animals escaped. By the late 1790s, Boone had soured on Kentucky and decided to leave. Yeah, he just wasn't much at that kind of life, was he? Later in life, he left the U.S. In 1799, Boone, then in his mid-60s, moved with his extended family from Kentucky, which achieved statehood in 1792 to present-day Missouri. Then, under Spanish control, known as the Upper Louisiana, the Spanish, who had wanted to encourage settlers in the area, welcomed Boone with military honors and granted him 850 acres of land in the Femme Ostage district, west of St. Louis. They also waived the requirements that all immigrants had to be Roman Catholic and made Boone a syndic or magistrate of the Femme Ostrich district, responsible for settling disputes among settlers. So again, he gets 850 acres. And remember, in 1792, Thomas Jefferson had not purchased had not done the Louisiana Purchase from the French or the Spanish or whatever it was. So anyway, in 1800, the Spanish ceded the Louisiana territory to France. Oh, there you go. And 3 years later, the U.S. gained control of it from Louisiana Purchase. Boone subsequently lost his land claim because he hadn't followed the proper procedure to gain the permanent title to the land. After the frontiersmen petitioned Congress, President James Madison signed a bill into law in 1814 giving Boone his 850 acres. However, he soon had to sell the property to pay off Kentuckians who heard the news about the grant and traveled to Missouri to collect on old debts. Missouri became America's 24th state in 1821, a year after Boone's death. Well, look, nothing comes, and when you get something for free and you owe people, you still have to pay them. He didn't wear a coonskin and half cap, did he? Boone has often been portrayed sporting a hat made from the skin and fur of raccoons. But in fact, the frontiersman, though this type of headgear was unstylish and instead don hats made from beaver, he wore hats of beaver, basically. According to Boone biographer John MacFarshar, the myth of the coonskin cap can be traced to a full-length portrait of Boone made in 1820 by Chester Harding, who authentically depicted the frontiersman wearing leggings, moccasins, and a fringed hunting shirt, and holding a beaver hat. The painting was displayed in Kentucky Capitol for several decades until it deteriorated. Harding later cut out Boone's head and pasted it onto a different background. However, a record of Boone's outfit was preserved thanks to artist James Otto Lewis, who had produced an engraving of Harding's original painting. Lewis hired an actor, Noah Ludd, to help sell prints made from the engraving, and when Ludd later performed a show that required him to dress like the frontiersman, he modeled his costume after Boone's wardrobe. In an engraving, unable to find a beaver hat, he substituted it with a coonskin hat. Ludlow's performances were a success, and the coonskin caps association with Boone stuck. So it was all by mistake because the guy didn't have a beaver hat. He substituted it with a coon hat. And there you go, what we have today. All mistaken. False information. Boone might not be buried in his official grave. Who would have thought? Boone died on September 26, 1820, in present-day Defiance, Missouri. He remained active into his old age, unsuccessfully volunteering to fight in the War of 1812 and going on his last big hunt just a few years later before he passed away. Boone was buried in a graveyard near Marthasville, Missouri, next to his wife, Rebecca. In 1845, the owners of the cemetery in Frankfort, Kentucky, convinced the Boone's descendants to allow Daniel and Rebecca's remains to be reinterred in the Bluegrass State. The Frankfort Cemetery was new, and its owners were interested in drumming up publicity. They also promised to erect a monument to Boone at his local new burial site. The elaborate retirement ceremony was held featuring the governor of Kentucky and other dignitaries. However, the changes eventually surfaced that Boone's Missouri grave had been poorly marked and the wrong remains were dug up and reburied in Kentucky. In 1883, the forensic anthropologist examined the cast made of Boone's supposedly skull before the reburial and announced it was possibly that of an African-American man rather than a Caucasian one. When a second forensics expert later studied the cast of the skull, though she decided it wasn't in good enough condition to serve as the basis for any scientific conclusions. Yeah, once they bury you, that's pretty much it. They don't know. Things fall to the side. And as you go, there's his house in Missouri. Pretty nice. There's some of his places. He's old. And they even put him on a coin. Look at that. A $50 commemorative coin. So there you go. He was quite the guy. There's one of his first log cabins. I do believe in Kentucky. Or was it North Carolina? One or the other. And there's his grave. Daniel Boone grave. Born in 1734 and died in 1820. Interred in eastern Kentucky in 1767, explored bluegrass region and from 69 to 71 and guided Transylvania Company blazed trails built for Fort Boonesboro in 1775 and directed defense of the fort from 1778. Immigrated to Missouri in 1799, reinterred with his wife Rebecca in Frankfort Cemetery in 1845. So there you go. He's been buried there, or somebody's been buried there ever since. But there's where his monument is. So go check it out. If you're on a traveling trip, go check it out there. And we're going to stop the share. Okay, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit and from my old book that I got. I sure do enjoy these little history books, and hope you don't mind the dogs barking in the background because that is really irritating, Lise. Anyway, remember, everybody, go out and do something good. Learn a little bit of history so you know what your future is. Because without history, we don't have much for a future. So with that, remember, everybody, thanks for coming. I appreciate y'all. Thanks for sticking with me tonight and every night that you come on. It means a whole lot. Remember, be the frequency you want to receive. I love you, everybody.